In the early morning hours of August 20th, 2016, in a quiet Minnesota town still recovering from a devastating tornado, a 5-year-old girl was sleeping peacefully in her bedroom. Wrapped in her favorite pink Princess Elsa blanket from the movie Frozen, Alayna Jeanne Ertl had no way of knowing that downstairs, a man her family trusted completely was about to commit an act so horrific it would shatter not just her family, but an entire community of approximately 1,000 residents who thought they knew exactly who to trust. This wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. This was a family friend, a coworker of her father, a man who played softball with her dad every single Friday night, a man who had spent the night at their home multiple times before, who knew the layout of their house, who knew exactly where Alayna slept. 25-year-old Zachary Todd Anderson had been drinking with Alayna's parents just hours earlier. They'd shared laughs at the local bar. They'd made plans for future softball games. And then, while the family slept, trusting him completely, Anderson made a choice that would end a little girl's life and expose a pattern of predatory behavior that had been hiding in plain sight for a decade. This is the story of Alayna Ertl, a story about the betrayal of trust in the closest knit of communities. A story about a small town that had already endured too much tragedy. A story about law enforcement racing against time. And ultimately, a story about a family determined to turn unimaginable grief into a legacy of love. I'm your host at Cold Case Desk, and today we're examining every detail of a case that asks the most haunting question any parent or community member can face. How do you know when to trust somebody or not? To understand the full impact of what happened to Alayna Ertl, you first need to understand the community of Watkins, Minnesota. Watkins is the kind of place that doesn't appear on most maps. With a population hovering around 1,000 residents, it's what locals call a stoplight-free town. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where you're never just a face in the crowd, where families have lived for generations and children grow up playing with the same friends their parents played with decades before. Located in Meeker County in central Minnesota, Watkins sits along Highway 55 between the towns of Kimball and Eden Valley, approximately 70 miles northwest of Minneapolis and about 25 miles south of St. Cloud. It's farming country, where the landscape rolls gently and the pace of life moves slower than in the cities. The kind of place people move to precisely because they want their children to grow up in safety, surrounded by neighbors who care. The heart of Watkins is St. Anthony Catholic Church, located at 171 Central Avenue. With approximately 250 families in its congregation, the church isn't just a place of worship, it's the social center of the community, the place where families celebrate baptisms and first communions, where they gather for funerals and festivals, where the entire town comes together in times of crisis. And by the summer of 2016, Watkins had certainly experienced its share of crisis. Just 1 year earlier, in August of 2015, the community had been devastated when 2 teenagers from Watkins were killed in a crash involving a drunk driver. One of those teens was Zachary Rohrbeck. This detail will become painfully significant later, because Zachary Rohrbeck was Alayna Ertl's cousin. The Ertl family had already buried one child, already experienced the particular agony that comes from senseless, preventable tragedy. But the summer of 2016 would bring an even more immediate crisis. On July 11, 2016, at approximately 5:55 in the evening, the National Weather Service issued a warning that would send chills through anyone who heard it. Large and extremely dangerous tornado. What hit Watkins that evening was classified as an EF2 tornado, a significant storm with maximum winds reaching 125 miles per hour. The tornado carved a path 2 miles long and 600 feet wide directly through the town, and when it finally lifted, the devastation was extensive. 25 homes sustained damage, with 12 of them extensively damaged. 5 businesses were hit. The Hilltop Healthcare Center, an assisted living facility, suffered roof damage and had to evacuate 50 residents. The mobile home park was damaged. One woman, Dolores Faber, was injured when she was pinned beneath a table and had to be hospitalized. Sheriff Brian Cruz of Meeker County would later say it was the worst storm damage the area had seen in 10 years. Luann Hess, who had lived in Watkins for 38 years, told reporters, "Never a bad storm like this, not this disruptive." But true to the character of small-town Minnesota, the Watkins community reacted very quickly to help residents recover. Within days, a table had been set up inside City Hall, filled with donated soaps, foodstuffs, and other goods for tornado victims. Neighbors helped neighbors repair roofs and clear debris. The town came together, as it always did. And there's one more critical detail about that tornado that would become tragically significant just over 1 month later. The tornado's path took it directly down the same street where the Ertl family lived. So by mid-August of 2016, Watkins was a community still in recovery mode. Donation tables still sat in City Hall, blue tarps still covered damaged roofs. The sound of hammers and saws still echoed through neighborhoods as repairs continued. It was against this backdrop, a small town that had already endured a fatal crash and a devastating natural disaster in just over a year, that an even darker tragedy was about to unfold. Alayna Jeanne Ertl was born on October 31, 2010, in St. Cloud, Minnesota, on Halloween. From the very beginning, her family called her their little peanut, and by all accounts, she was exactly the kind of child who lights up every room she enters. At 5 years old, Alayna had sandy, blonde, shoulder-length hair and big brown eyes that seemed to always be smiling. She weighed about 45 pounds and possessed the kind of infectious joy that adults find both delightful and humbling. Her mother, Kayla Ertl, would later describe her daughter's morning routine. She would come in our room every morning and give us a kiss good morning and make sure everybody else was okay. Think about that for a moment. A 5-year-old child, concerned about making sure everyone else was okay. That tells you everything you need to know about who Alayna was. Nicole Rohrbeck, a close family friend, put it simply, "I've never seen her unhappy." Alayna's obituary would later note that she gave joy to our lives by always having a smile and kind words to say. She was an animal lover, a princess, a singer, a great friend to everyone she met. Like most little girls her age, Alayna had specific interests and favorites. She loved My Little Ponies. She adored wearing skirts and jewelry. Her favorite colors were pink and purple. Her favorite movie was Disney's Frozen, and she was particularly fond of Princess Elsa, so much so that she had a pink Elsa blanket that she slept with every single night. Her favorite song was You Are My Sunshine, which her family called her Sun Song. This detail would take on heartbreaking significance at her funeral. But Alayna wasn't just a princess-loving little girl. She was also adventurous and outdoorsy. She loved going hunting with her father, Matt Ertl. She played on go-karts that her dad had built for her and her older brother, Carter. She swung hula hoops and rode bicycles with the freedom and fearlessness that comes naturally to children growing up in a safe, small town. Her relationship with her brother Carter, who was approximately 8 years old at the time, was particularly special. The obituary noted that she loved learning from her brother and always gave the best hugs. Alayna had just completed preschool at Eden Valley Watkins Elementary School, where her mother, Kayla, both worked and volunteered. Her teacher for the upcoming kindergarten year had already been assigned, Dawn Quakela. The new school year was set to begin just 2 weeks after August 20th, 2016. Dawn Quakela would never get to teach Alayna Ertl. The Ertl family was deeply rooted in the Watkins community. Alayna's paternal grandparents, Rick and Kim Ertl, owned the Riverside Tavern in nearby Litchfield. Her maternal grandparents were Jeff and Mary Well of Rockville. She had aunts, uncles, and cousins throughout the region. The family were active parishioners at St. Anthony Catholic Church, attending services regularly and participating in community events. In her short 5 years of life, Alayna had already experienced loss. Her obituary notes that she was preceded in death by several great-grandparents and, most significantly, by 2 cousins, Zyler Roberts and Zachary Rohrbeck. That second name, Zachary Rohrbeck, was the teenager killed in the drunk driving crash just 1 year earlier. So the Ertl family knew grief. They understood tragedy. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared them for what was about to happen. Reverend Aaron Nett of St. Anthony Catholic Church would later say at Alayna's funeral, "Today we remember a little girl who was given to us as a gift. She had a love for others which was free and innocent." Free and innocent. That's exactly what 5-year-old children should be. That's exactly what Alayna Ertl was. Until the early morning hours of August 20th, 2016. Friday, August 19th, 2016, was supposed to be just another typical Friday night for Matt Ertl and his friend Zachary Anderson. Every Friday during the summer, Matt played on a local softball team called the River Rats. It was a recreational league, the kind of thing working men do to unwind after a week of labor, to maintain friendships, to feel young and competitive even as they inch toward middle age. Matt worked as a utility locator for a company called Vanguard Utility Partners, a job that involved finding and marking underground utility lines before construction or excavation work began. It was outdoor work, physical work, the kind that makes a cold beer taste particularly good on a Friday night. Zachary Anderson worked for the same company, though on a different crew. He and Matt had been co-workers for years, had become friends through work, and Anderson had become a regular fixture at Friday night softball games. At approximately 10:30 that evening, Matt and Zachary were at the softball field together, playing with their team. It was a typical August evening in Minnesota, warm but not oppressive, with the sun setting late and the air filled with the sounds of aluminum bats and friendly trash talk. After the game ended around 11 o'clock, the group decided to continue the night at Riverside Tavern in Forest City. Anderson and Matt Ertl arrived at the bar somewhere between 11 o'clock and 1 in the morning. Anderson consumed 2 beers. The conversation turned, as it often did, to hunting. Anderson mentioned his family's cabin up north, the kind of place Minnesota men dream about. A rustic retreat in the woods where you can hunt deer and fish and escape the pressures of daily life. Matt Ertl would have had no reason to think twice about this conversation. Anderson had mentioned the cabin before. It was just casual bar talk. Around 1:30 to 2 o'clock in the morning, the group moved to a second location, Gordy's Bar in Watkins, located on Central Avenue, just blocks from the Ertl family home. This was even more convenient, even more casual. Matt's wife, Kayla, joined them at Gordy's. Anderson bought beers for the Ertls. He consumed several vodka Red Bulls himself. The bar closed at 2 o'clock in the morning, as Minnesota law requires. Kayla headed home first, arriving around 2 o'clock. She went upstairs and put 5-year-old Alayna to bed, making sure she had her beloved pink Princess Elsa blanket. This would be the last time anyone except Zachary Anderson would see Alayna Ertl alive. Matt arrived home around 2:30 in the morning. And sometime between 3:30 and 3:45 in the morning, Zachary Anderson arrived at the Ertl residence. Now, this is important. Anderson showing up at the Ertl home after a night of drinking was not unusual. Sheriff Brian Cruz would later emphasize this point to reporters. Our suspect in this case is a family friend, co-worker of the victim's father, and was staying the night up in Watkins last night. He had previously been to that residence and spent a night here and there. So he's not a stranger and not new to the residence. The phrase, "spent a night here and there," is crucial. Anderson wasn't a stranger. He wasn't some predator lurking outside the house, looking for an opportunity. He was a trusted friend who had been welcomed into the Ertl home multiple times. He knew the layout. He knew where the bedrooms were. He knew the family's routines. According to what investigators would later piece together, Matt Ertl and Anderson talked for a while after Anderson arrived, probably until around 4 o'clock in the morning. Then Matt, exhausted from work and drinking and softball, went to bed. He left Zachary Anderson awake in his home, where his 5-year-old daughter was sleeping. Somewhere between 4 o'clock and 8 o'clock that Saturday morning, August 20th, 2016, Zachary Todd Anderson entered Alayna Ertl's bedroom, wrapped her in her pink frozen blanket, and carried her out of the house. He also took the keys to Matt's 2002 GMC Sierra pickup truck, and critically, Matt's cell phone was inside that truck. When Matt and Kayla woke up between 8 and 8:30 that morning, their daughter was gone. Anderson was gone. Matt's truck was gone. And an 8-hour nightmare was about to begin. Imagine waking up in your home, the home you've lived in for years, in the town where you grew up, surrounded by neighbors you've known your entire life, and discovering that your 5-year-old daughter is simply gone. Not gone from her bed, having wandered into another room, not playing hide and seek, not at a friend's house, just gone. And the man you trusted, the man you considered a friend, the man you'd been drinking with just hours earlier, is also gone, along with your truck. This was the reality Matt and Kayla Ertl woke up to at approximately 8 o'clock to 8:30 on Saturday morning, August 20th, 2016. The initial moments of a parental nightmare are always the same. Confusion giving way to concern, giving way to panic, giving way to sheer terror. You check every room. You call out names. You run outside. You call the cell phone, hoping for a reasonable explanation, some silly misunderstanding. Matt's cell phone went straight to voicemail, because it was in his truck. And his truck was, at that very moment, approximately 80 to 100 miles away, heading north through rural Minnesota with his daughter inside. By 10 o'clock that morning, Matt and Kayla had contacted the Meeker County Sheriff's Office to file a missing persons report. The initial response would have been standard procedure. Get descriptions, get the last known information, start making calls. But this wasn't a typical missing person case, and law enforcement knew it immediately. A 5-year-old girl doesn't just wander away. A family friend doesn't just drive off with someone's child without permission. And most critically, there was that cell phone. This is where modern technology becomes a blessing and a curse in criminal investigations. Matt's cell phone was in the stolen truck, and cell phones constantly communicate with cell towers, leaving a digital trail of their location. By tracking the phone, investigators could track the truck. And by tracking the truck, they could track Zachary Anderson and Alayna Ertl. At 6:30 that morning. Remember, this is before the Ertls had even woken up to discover them missing. The cell phone had pinged off a tower in Todd County, which is north of Meeker County, along the route towards central Minnesota's lake country and wilderness areas. At 8:30 in the morning, a critically important sighting occurred. Anderson was spotted alone at a convenience store near Browerville, Minnesota. Browerville is a tiny town in Todd County with a population of only about 740 people. It's the kind of place with one gas station, one convenience store, the kind of place where a stranger sticks out. Anderson appeared alone at the store. There was no mention of seeing Alayna. This sighting confirmed he was traveling north, confirmed he had the truck, and confirmed the timeline. But it also raised a horrifying question. Where was Alayna at 8:30 in the morning? At 9 o'clock that morning, the cell phone pinged one final time in Todd County. And then it was shut off. This is a critically important detail. Anderson knew the phone could be tracked. So he turned it off. This wasn't panic. This wasn't confusion. This was conscious decision-making. This was someone who understood they were being hunted and took steps to avoid capture. By 10 o'clock, when Matt and Kayla filed their missing persons report, Anderson and Alayna had already been gone for potentially 6 hours. The trail had just gone cold. The Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, the state's primary investigative agency for major crimes, joined the investigation immediately. This wasn't going to be handled just by small-town sheriffs. This required resources, expertise, and coordination across multiple counties. And then, at 1:12 in the afternoon, the decision was made that would turn this from a local emergency into a statewide crisis. A statewide Amber Alert was issued for 5-year-old Alayna Jeanne Ertl and 25-year-old suspect Zachary Todd Anderson. Suddenly, this wasn't just Watkins' tragedy. This wasn't just Meeker County's problem. Every Minnesotan with a cell phone, every person watching television, every driver on every highway would now see Alayna's face and Anderson's description. The alert described Alayna as a white female child, 5 years old, 3 feet 6 inches tall, 45 pounds, with brown eyes and blonde shoulder-length hair. She was believed to be wearing a pink nightgown. The alert noted she had been abducted by a family acquaintance. Anderson was described as a white male, 5 feet 10 inches tall, approximately 200 pounds, with dark hair and a shaggy beard. The vehicle was described as a 2002 gray GMC Sierra with Minnesota license plates. The alert included one more crucial detail. Anderson was believed to be in the Alexandria area. This made sense given the Todd County cell phone pings and the northward trajectory. Alexandria is a popular resort town in central Minnesota, known for its lakes and summer cabins. But investigators had one more critical piece of information that wouldn't be made public for several more hours, and this information would change everything. At approximately 2 o'clock that afternoon, as the Amber Alert spread across Minnesota and hundreds of law enforcement officers scrambled to find any trace of Anderson and Alayna, a phone rang at the Cass County Sheriff's Office. The caller was Zachary Anderson's father. Think about this for a moment. Put yourself in this man's position. You've seen the Amber Alert. You've seen your son's name. You've seen the face of a 5-year-old girl. You know your son has a cabin, your family's cabin, in a remote area of Cass County. You know he's asked to use it before. And now you have to make a choice. You can say nothing, protect your son, hope he gets away, hope this is all some terrible misunderstanding. Or you can do what Anderson's father did. Immediately call law enforcement and give them permission to search the property. We don't know this man's name. It's never been made public. But his actions that day may well have saved precious hours of search time and potentially saved law enforcement officers' lives. He told the Cass County Sheriff that his son had called, asking to use the family cabin near Motley, Minnesota. He provided the specific location, 4,926 Iroquois Trail Loop Southwest, in an area called Wilderness Park Estates in Meadowbrook Township, Cass County. This wasn't a guess. This was exact information, and he gave law enforcement complete permission to search the property immediately. The cabin was located approximately 35 miles northwest of Brainerd, about 80 to 100 miles north of Watkins, in some of the most remote wilderness in central Minnesota. Wilderness Park Estates isn't a development in the suburban sense. It's a collection of small cabins and trailer homes nestled among tall trees, the kind of place people go to disappear, whether for recreation or for darker purposes. The property was heavily wooded with swampy areas. There was a ravine on site. The cabin itself was several miles down a gravel road, surrounded by wilderness. Adjacent to the property was Meadowbrook Wildlife Management Area, which is essentially thousands of acres of public land with freshwater forested wetlands, abundant wildlife, and terrain that can be challenging even for experienced outdoorsmen. This is where Anderson had taken Alayna, to a remote cabin in dense wilderness, far from prying eyes, far from help, far from any chance of rescue. By approximately 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock that afternoon, multiple teams of officers had been deployed to the cabin location. The first pair of officers arrived to find a scene that immediately escalated the situation from missing child to active crime scene. Matt Ertl's stolen 2002 GMC Sierra was there, but it had been driven into a ravine, concealed from casual view. This wasn't someone parking at a cabin for a weekend getaway. This was someone hiding evidence. Inside the cabin, officers found a 20-gauge shotgun on the kitchen table. Ammunition was spilled near it, and there was a handwritten suicide note with blood visible on the upper corner. Anderson had been planning to kill himself. The question was, had he already killed Alayna? Officers also found the truck keys inside the cabin, confirming Anderson had been there. But Anderson himself was nowhere to be found. A second pair of officers was deployed to the property, and this team included a specialized unit that would prove absolutely crucial, a canine unit from the Cass County Sheriff's Office. The handler was Deputy Bill Connor. His partner had 4 legs and a name that would soon become famous in Minnesota: Yankee. Yankee was a German shepherd trained in tracking and search and rescue operations. His trainer, Steve Pearson, had worked with him extensively, teaching him to follow scent trails through difficult terrain, to maintain focus in challenging conditions, and to never give up on a trail. But the situation Yankee faced on August 20th, 2016 was uniquely difficult. Normally, canine tracking requires what's called a scent article, an item of clothing or personal belonging that carries the target's scent. The dog smells the article, then follows that specific scent through the environment. It's remarkably effective, but it requires that initial scent sample. The officers at the cabin didn't have an item of Alayna's clothing. They didn't have anything Anderson had been wearing. They didn't have a scent article. What they had was a cabin in the middle of dense wilderness, surrounded by swamps and heavy forest, with an armed and potentially suicidal suspect somewhere in the vicinity. They'd also deployed a helicopter with infrared technology to search from above, hoping to detect body heat that would indicate a person in the woods. The helicopter found nothing. Steve Pearson, Yankee's trainer, would later explain what he believed happened. Because authorities did not have an item of clothing for Yankee to go off, he believes the German shepherd tracked Anderson's fear scent. Fear has a smell. Anyone who's ever been truly terrified knows this. The body produces chemical signals, adrenaline, cortisol, other stress hormones that literally change your scent, and highly trained dogs can detect these changes. Yankee picked up a trail from the cabin leading into the woods. He followed footsteps into the swampy terrain, tracking through an environment where a human would have quickly become lost and disoriented. The woods around the cabin weren't a nice nature trail. This was wetland wilderness, uneven ground, standing water, thick brush, the kind of place where you can be 50 feet from someone and never see them. Deputy Connor followed Yankee, trusting his partner's nose implicitly. They moved through the swamp, pushing through vegetation, stepping carefully on unstable ground. The search continued for what must have felt like hours. And then, at approximately 4:23 to 4:30 in the afternoon, Yankee led Deputy Connor to a site that has been seared into the memory of everyone involved. There, standing knee-deep in swamp water, approximately a quarter mile from the cabin, was Zachary Todd Anderson. He had fresh lacerations on his left wrist, self-inflicted wounds from an apparent suicide attempt. He was unarmed. He was alone. And he was about to be asked the question every law enforcement officer on the scene desperately wanted answered. When officers approached Anderson in the swamp, he didn't resist. He didn't try to run. He simply stood there, knee-deep in water, with cuts on his wrist, looking at the armed deputies surrounding him. The first question was obvious. Where's Alayna? Anderson's response was chilling. What girl? This wasn't confusion. This wasn't disorientation. This was a conscious choice to claim ignorance, to pretend he didn't know what they were talking about, to play dumb about the 5-year-old girl whose face was on every television and phone screen in Minnesota. The officers pressed him. Anderson invoked his right to remain silent. Not once, not twice. 3 separate times, Zachary Anderson clearly stated that he did not want to talk to police. This is a critical moment, and it's important to understand why. Under the Fifth Amendment to the United States Constitution, every person has the right to remain silent when questioned by law enforcement. Once someone invokes that right, questioning must stop. This isn't a technicality or a loophole. This is a fundamental protection against coerced confessions and violations of individual rights. Zachary Anderson invoked his Fifth Amendment rights 3 times, and investigators kept questioning him anyway. Now, before we judge their actions too harshly, understand the situation they were facing. Somewhere in this swamp was a 5-year-old girl. Was she still alive? Was she injured? Was she dying while they stood there? Every second mattered. Every minute could be the difference between life and death. But the Constitution doesn't have an emergency exception clause. Rights are rights, even when they're inconvenient, even when they protect guilty people, even when following them might mean a child dies. Despite Anderson invoking his rights, the BCA agents who arrived on scene continued talking to him. They told him about the need to bring Alayna home. They asked whether she was still alive. They pointed to the cut on his wrist and suggested he needed medical attention. They told him, "People make mistakes, but that doesn't make them a monster." Anderson responded, "I don't know anything." And then one agent asked the question that would eventually lead them to Alayna. "Is that little girl out here in the swamp, or do we have to drive somewhere else to get her?" Anderson stood there in the water, and then, very quietly, he said 2 words. "In the swamp." He asked for a cigarette, and then he led officers to where he had hidden Alayna's body. At 6:02 in the evening on August 20th, 2016, approximately 8 hours after the Ertl family had woken to discover their daughter missing, Alayna Jeanne Ertl was found. Her tiny body was completely submerged in the swamp water, hidden under brush and debris. Officers found her pink Princess Elsa blanket first, and then they found her. She was unclothed. She had been left in knee-deep water in a remote swamp, concealed deliberately to make discovery difficult. Alayna Ertl was pronounced dead at the scene. The Amber Alert that had blanketed Minnesota for the past 5 hours was canceled, but instead of the news everyone had prayed for, child found safe, reunited with family, the announcement was devastating. Sheriff Brian Cruz of Meeker County held a press conference that evening. His statement was brief and factual. The body of Alayna Ertl has been recovered. This now has moved into a homicide investigation. He also acknowledged the emotional toll on everyone involved. Obviously not the outcome that we wanted. And when we did learn the information, the officers in the room, you could see it weighed heavy on them. We tried everything we could today to find her safely. And obviously, that didn't happen. Back in Watkins, when news spread that Alayna's body had been found, the reaction wasn't anger or vengeance or rage. It was simple, devastating grief. Nicole Rohrbeck, a close family friend, captured the community's shock. "I've never seen her unhappy." That's what they kept coming back to. The image of a smiling, joyful 5-year-old girl who loved everyone she met. Dawn Quakela, the teacher who would have taught Alayna kindergarten, spoke to reporters with visible emotion. Horrific, very difficult. Just not knowing, not understanding why, and trying to understand just where we go from here. She added, "When something like this happens, it leaves a hole." Lori Rippentrop, another teacher at Eden Valley Watkins Elementary, expressed what many felt, "I just feel helpless. And I think everyone in the whole state is in shock. Small town, central Minnesota, that can't be happening." But it had happened. In small-town Minnesota, where people don't lock their doors, where children play outside unsupervised, where families trust their neighbors and their friends, a 5-year-old girl had been kidnapped from her own bed by someone her family trusted completely. At approximately 10 o'clock that evening, Zachary Todd Anderson was booked into the Crow Wing County Jail on suspicion of first-degree murder and kidnapping. And then the questions began. How had this happened? Why had this happened? And most haunting of all, had there been warning signs that everyone missed? In the days following Alayna's death, law enforcement began piecing together not just what happened that night, but who Zachary Anderson really was. Sheriff Brian Cruz held multiple press conferences, and his statements revealed just how shocking this case was, even to experienced investigators. "We have no known predatory sexual offender information on him or anything like that," Sheriff Cruz told reporters. "We have no known motive. We are at a loss as to why this happened at this time." This is significant. Anderson wasn't on any registry. He didn't have a criminal record as an adult. If you'd run a standard background check, you'd find nothing more alarming than a few traffic violations. Sheriff Cruz emphasized Anderson's connection to the family. Our suspect in this case is a family friend, co-worker of the victim's father, and was staying the night up in Watkins last night. He had previously been to that residence and spent a night here and there, so he's not a stranger and not new to the residence. The question on everyone's mind was simple. How could they not have known? But here's the thing about predators. They're very, very good at appearing normal. They cultivate trust. They become the person everyone relies on. They're the friendly coworker, the softball teammate, the guy who buys you a beer, the friend who crashes on your couch after a night out. One relative of the Ertl family, speaking anonymously to reporters, captured this perfectly. Anderson always had a story, but never saw a reason to question his intentions. The relative asked the question that haunts every person who's ever trusted someone they shouldn't have. Where's the line when you know when to trust somebody or not? It's a question without a good answer. Because if we don't trust anyone, we can't have community, we can't have friendship, we can't have the kind of small-town life that makes places like Watkins special. But if we trust everyone, we leave ourselves vulnerable to the worst kind of betrayal. The investigation into what happened in those hours between 4 a.m. and 6:02 p.m. required multiple agencies working in coordination. The Meeker County Sheriff's Office was the primary investigating agency, since that's where Alayna was taken from. But the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension provided agents and expertise. The Cass County Sheriff's Office was involved because that's where the crime scene was located. The Todd County Sheriff tracked the cell phone pings. The Crow Wing County Jail held Anderson. The Minnesota State Patrol assisted. Even the FBI was consulted. This wasn't just law enforcement doing their jobs. This was personal for many of them. Some of these officers had children Alayna's age. Some of them knew the family. Some of them had helped clean up after the tornado just a month earlier. They weren't just investigating a crime. They were trying to make sense of how this could happen in their community. Steve Pearson, the trainer who worked with Yankee the Canine, made a statement that reveals just how critical the dog's tracking ability was. Those officers, when they got to the cabin, had no idea where to start. They tried using a helicopter, and people down in the woods and whatnot. I have no doubt he would have gotten away without Yankee's help. Think about that. If Anderson's father hadn't called, if Yankee hadn't tracked him, if any one of several critical things had gone differently, Anderson might have died by suicide in that swamp, and Alayna's body might not have been found for days, weeks, or months. The family might never have had closure, but there was one more piece of this puzzle that investigators were about to discover, and it would reveal that Zachary Anderson's attack on Alayna wasn't his first predatory act. It was just the first one that ended in murder. After Anderson's arrest, reporters began digging into his background, and what they found was buried in juvenile court records from Wright County, from nearly a decade earlier, when Anderson was just a teenager. The records were public because Anderson had been 16 or older when convicted of a felony, which under Minnesota law meant the records couldn't be sealed. But they'd never made headlines. They'd never resulted in serious consequences. They'd certainly never flagged Anderson as a danger to children. The story began in May of 2006, when 15-year-old Zachary Anderson and his mother lived in a townhouse complex in Monticello, Minnesota. Next door lived a 31-year-old single mother with 2 children. Anderson began leaving what the woman described as love notes on her windshield. The note said she was a pretty lady and asked if she wanted him to be her boyfriend. The woman initially laughed it off. A 15-year-old boy with a crush on an adult neighbor wasn't particularly alarming. Inappropriate, yes, but dangerous? It didn't seem that way. The woman also suspected Anderson of stealing cigarettes from her garage, but she couldn't prove it. Then, in December of 2006, Anderson was now 16 years old. Something happened that should have set off every alarm. At 1:30 in the morning, Anderson appeared at the woman's door wearing only boxer shorts. He pounded on the door, demanding sex. According to the woman's statement to police, he said, "Come on, you know you wanna? Open the door! Open the door! Come on! And you know you want to!" The woman's boyfriend came downstairs, and Anderson fled. This wasn't a confused teenage crush anymore. This was sexual aggression. This was a 16-year-old boy showing up at an adult woman's home in the middle of the night, nearly naked, demanding sex. But the story gets worse. In June of 2007, while the woman and her children slept upstairs in their home, Zachary Anderson removed a window screen, entered her house illegally, and stole her cell phone from the living room. He had broken into her home while she and her children slept. He had committed a burglary. But more significantly, he had demonstrated a willingness to violate the sanctity and safety of a family's home, to enter where he wasn't wanted, to take what wasn't his, to invade a space where vulnerable people were sleeping. Anderson was charged with first-degree burglary and theft, but in a plea deal, he pled guilty to third-degree burglary. His sentence? Mandatory community service and an apology letter. The woman later told reporters that the apology letter was only about 2 sentences long. She also said that she was so fearful after the incident that she moved away from Monticello. But Anderson never faced serious consequences. No jail time. No registration requirements. No flag in any system that would have warned future potential victims. When the woman learned in 2016 what Anderson had done to Alayna Ertl, she spoke to reporters at WCCO, hoping that speaking out would encourage others to step forward, saying, "It is hard to believe Anderson did not target other women or children in the decade between her incident and the killing of Alayna Ertl." Think about the pattern here. At 15, unwanted romantic advances toward an adult woman, persistent and inappropriate. At 16, showing up nearly naked at her door, demanding sex. At 16, breaking into her home while she and her children slept. At 25, kidnapping, sexually assaulting, and murdering a 5-year-old girl. This is called escalation. This is called a pattern of predatory behavior. This is called exactly the kind of progression that criminologists and forensic psychologists see in serial offenders. And it was all documented. It was all in the system. And yet somehow, 9 years later, this man was trusted enough to spend the night in a home with a 5-year-old girl. Sheriff Brian Cruz's statement takes on new meaning now. We have no known predatory sexual offender information on him or anything like that. Technically, this was true. Anderson wasn't on any sex offender registry. He hadn't been convicted of a sex crime. His juvenile burglary conviction didn't flag him as dangerous. But the information existed, the pattern existed, and a 5-year-old girl paid the price for a system that didn't connect the dots. The Ramsey County Medical Examiner's Office conducted Alayna's autopsy. The preliminary report, released on August 21, 2016, listed the cause of death as homicidal violence. This is the term medical examiners use when the manner of death is clearly homicide, but the full autopsy hasn't been completed. It's a way of confirming that a death was not accidental, not natural, not a suicide, but a murder. The complete autopsy findings were more specific, but I'll present them in the most age-appropriate and monetization-safe way possible, because this is important information, but it needs to be handled with care. The official cause of death was listed as strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The autopsy also revealed evidence of criminal sexual conduct with sexual penetration, which under Minnesota law is the technical term for what occurred. These findings told investigators several critical things. First, Alayna had been subjected to a violent assault. The combination of strangulation and blunt force trauma indicated that multiple methods were used, suggesting either a struggle or a sustained attack. Second, the presence of evidence confirming criminal sexual conduct meant that this wasn't just a murder. This was a sexually motivated crime against a child, which would carry the most severe penalties under Minnesota law. Third, the forensic evidence would be crucial for prosecution. Physical evidence from the autopsy, combined with the crime scene evidence and Anderson's eventual statements, would build an overwhelming case against him. But for the Ertl family, the autopsy results weren't about building a legal case. They were confirmation of the absolute worst nightmare any parent can imagine. Their 5-year-old daughter, their little peanut, who gave everyone kisses in the morning and always had a smile on her face, had suffered in the last moments of her life. There's no way to soften this. There's no way to make it less horrific. A trusted family friend had kidnapped a sleeping child, driven her 80 to 100 miles away from everything she knew, subjected her to unimaginable violence, and then tried to hide what he'd done by leaving her body in a swamp. And now the question became, what would justice look like for Alayna Ertl? On August 23, 2016, 3 days after Alayna's body was found, Zachary Todd Anderson made his first appearance in Cass County District Court in Walker, Minnesota. Judge David Harrington presided over the initial hearing. Anderson's demeanor was noted by everyone in the courtroom. He was stoic. He showed no emotion. He said only 2 or 3 words during the entire proceeding. This is significant because it's common for defendants in high-profile cases to show emotion, whether genuine remorse, false contrition, or the shock of suddenly facing serious consequences. But Anderson showed nothing. No tears, no visible distress, no indication that he felt anything at all about what he had done. The initial charges filed against Anderson were 1 count of second-degree murder, 2 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 2 counts of kidnapping, 1 count of motor vehicle theft. These were just the initial charges, filed quickly to ensure Anderson remained in custody while investigators completed their work. More charges would come later as the grand jury reviewed all the evidence. Bail was set at $2 million unconditional, or $1 million with conditions. This effectively ensured that Anderson would remain in jail throughout the legal process. There was no way he was coming up with that kind of money, and no judge was going to allow him to be released anyway, given the nature of the charges. Scott Collins, a public defender from Thief River Falls, was appointed to represent Anderson. In Minnesota's legal system, even the most heinous criminals have a right to competent legal representation. It's not a popular principle when the defendant is accused of murdering a child, but it's a fundamental protection that ensures the fairness of the entire justice system. Anderson pled not guilty at this initial appearance, which is standard procedure. Very few defendants plead guilty at their first court appearance. It's not the time for that decision. It's simply the time to acknowledge the charges, enter an initial plea, and begin the legal process. But everyone in that courtroom, the judge, the prosecutors, the defense attorneys, the reporters, the handful of community members allowed inside, knew this case was going to be extraordinary. The evidence was overwhelming. The crime was horrific, and the community was watching. While the legal system slowly ground into motion, the community of Watkins was trying to process an incomprehensible tragedy. On the evening of August 23, 2016, the same day as Anderson's first court appearance, a candlelight vigil was held in the parking lot of St. Anthony Catholic Church, directly across the street from the Ertl family home. The attendance was extraordinary. Hundreds of people came. Some estimates suggested nearly 1,000 people, essentially the entire population of Watkins, plus people from surrounding communities. They came carrying candles, wearing pink and purple, Alayna's favorite colors, many bringing their own children. Reverend Ertl led the vigil. There were prayers and Bible readings and hymns. A large video screen was set up showing images of Alayna from birth to age 5, her big brown eyes, her infectious smile, her joy. Matt and Kayla Ertl were there, and they lit the first candles. Soon 1,000 small flames flickered in the darkness, each one representing a community member touched by this tragedy. Each one a prayer for a little girl who would never have the chance to grow up. Children released pink and purple balloons into the evening sky. The crowd sang "Let It Go" from Frozen, the movie Alayna had loved so much. Reverend Net's words that evening captured the impossible task of making sense of the senseless. Today we remember a little girl who was given to us as a gift. She had a love for others, which was free and innocent. Jesse Teicher, the church secretary, tried to estimate the crowd size. There really might be up to 1,000, we really have no idea. Our kids went to the same school. It's a terrible thing. Nicole Olmscheid spoke for many parents when she said the tragedy had really touched home now that we have our own daughter. The vigil was standing room only. People spilled out of the parking lot onto the street, and when it was over, nobody wanted to leave. They stood in small groups, talking quietly, hugging, crying, trying to support each other through something that nobody should ever have to experience. At the Ertl family home, a memorial began to grow. Angel figurines appeared on the front steps. Flowers were laid at the door, cards were left with messages of love and support. This memorial would continue to grow for months, with gifts and messages arriving from people all over Minnesota, even from strangers in other states who had seen Alayna's story and felt compelled to reach out. According to reports, the gifts and cards came from so many touched by Alayna's life. Even strangers from states away pledging to be more patient parents and not taking the time they have with their own kids for granted. A GoFundMe campaign was launched on August 21st to help the family with expenses. The goal was $10,000. Within 8 hours, $14,000 had been donated. Within 2 days, the total exceeded $40,000. By the time the campaign closed, over $49,000 had been contributed by people who wanted to help in the only way they could. The Ertl family was still reeling from the tornado damage just a month earlier. Now, they were facing funeral expenses and the complete disruption of their lives. The community's financial support was practical and immediate, but more than that, It was a tangible expression of collective grief and solidarity. Tom Ertl, who ran the Ertl Funeral Home and was a distant relative, a second cousin of Alayna's grandfather, Rick, would be responsible for handling Alayna's funeral arrangements. Speaking to reporters, he captured the raw emotion everyone was feeling. "It's been hell. This is just senseless. There are no words." And that was the truth. There were no words, no explanation, no way to make this make sense. On Thursday, August 25, 2016, visitation was held at Ertl Funeral Home at 221 Church Street in Watkins. It ran from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the evening, and the line of mourners stretched out the door and down the block. Parish prayers were held at 8 o'clock that evening. On Friday morning, August 26th, visitation resumed from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And then, at 10:30 in the morning, Alayna's funeral service began at St. Anthony Catholic Church. The church was packed, standing room only. Mourners filled the balcony. People stood in the back, along the side aisles, anywhere they could find space. The front 4 pews were filled with family. Reverend Aaron Nett and Father Bob Rolfus officiated. Kathy Pauls provided music. But before the service officially began, something extraordinary happened. The entire community sang, "You Are My Sunshine," a cappella, no instrumental accompaniment, just hundreds of voices coming together to sing Alayna's favorite song, her son's song. And then, as the congregation sang, Alayna's tiny white-covered coffin was brought into the church. If you've never been to a child's funeral, you may not realize how small the coffin is. Adult coffins are large, substantial, designed to hold a full-grown body. A coffin for a 5-year-old child is heartbreakingly tiny. It's a physical representation of a life cut impossibly short, of potential that will never be realized, of all the birthdays and graduations and weddings that will never happen. In the funeral pamphlet, the family included a message directly to Alayna: "We love you more than anything, baby girl, and miss you incredibly. Please watch over us all and be the beautiful angel that you are up in heaven. Dance your heart out, Peanut. Dance your heart out, Peanut." The image of Alayna dancing in heaven, free from pain, free from fear, finally safe again. Reverend Nett's homily addressed the questions everyone was asking. "We must let this change us," he told the congregation. "Why did this happen to such a beautiful, innocent girl? Why her, and why us? Why in this way?" He didn't pretend to have answers. He couldn't. But he could give voice to the rage and confusion everyone felt. Such a senseless violence, such an evil act, an act that could only be authored by Satan himself. It is incomprehensible and an insult to humanity. Reverend Nett also acknowledged the multiple tragedies Watkins had faced. It is hard to imagine how the town could be hit by another tragedy this year. He was referring to the tornado in July, but he might as well have been talking about the drunk driving deaths the year before, about the accumulation of pain and loss that this small community had endured. After the service, Alayna was buried at St. Anthony Catholic Cemetery in Watkins. A community lunch was held at the Watkins Town Hall, where hundreds of people gathered to share food and stories and memories of a little girl who had touched so many lives in just 5 short years. Kayla Ertl spoke briefly to reporters, her words capturing the particular betrayal of this crime. People that you think that you know, and that you trust and become your friend, and you have in your home and turn their back on you, and you don't understand it. You think you know someone. You trust them. You welcome them into your home, and then they turn their back on you in the most horrific way imaginable. How do you recover from that? How do you ever trust anyone again? How do you explain to your surviving child, 8-year-old Carter, why his little sister is gone? How do you go on living in a house where your daughter was stolen from her bed? How do you drive down streets where everyone knows exactly what happened to your family? These are questions without good answers. But the Ertl family would have to find a way forward. Because as Cass County Attorney Benjamin Lindstrom would later say, it's never going to be over for them because they don't have Alayna anymore. The funeral was not an ending. It was just the beginning of a very long, very painful journey towards something that might eventually resemble justice. For over a year after Alayna's death, the legal case against Zachary Anderson moved through the system with methodical slowness. Prosecutors built their case, defense attorneys reviewed evidence, motions were filed and argued, and on October 25, 2017, a grand jury returned an indictment that reflected the full scope of Anderson's crimes. The indictment included 19 criminal charges, 8 counts of first-degree murder, under various legal theories about what makes a killing first-degree, 1 count of second-degree intentional murder, 2 counts of first-degree criminal sexual conduct, 2 counts of second-degree criminal sexual conduct, 4 counts of kidnapping, 2 counts of interference with a dead body, 1 count of motor vehicle theft, 19 charges, each one representing a different aspect of what Anderson had done that night, each one carrying its own potential sentence. The multiple murder charges weren't a mistake or redundancy. They reflected different legal theories under which someone can be charged with first-degree murder in Minnesota. For example, there's first-degree murder during the commission of a felony. There's first-degree premeditated murder. Each charge represents a different way the prosecution could prove Anderson was guilty of the most serious degree of murder. Anderson initially pled not guilty to all charges. This was expected. At this stage, the defense was still reviewing evidence, still determining strategy, still deciding whether to take the case to trial or attempt to negotiate a plea. But the evidence against Anderson was overwhelming. There was the canine tracking him to the swamp. There was his father's testimony about the phone call asking to use the cabin. There were the cell phone pings tracking the stolen truck. There was the physical evidence from the cabin, the hidden truck, the suicide note, the shotgun. There was the forensic evidence from the autopsy. And most damning of all, there was Anderson's own statement leading officers to Alayna's body. Well, actually, that last piece of evidence was about to become complicated. On March 24, 2017, Anderson's defense attorney Scott Collins filed several motions challenging the case against his client. These motions included a motion claiming insufficient probable cause to indict, a motion claiming Anderson's constitutional rights were violated, a motion to suppress evidence, a motion for change of venue. The most significant of these was the constitutional challenge. Collins argued that Anderson's Fifth Amendment rights had been violated when investigators continued questioning him after he invoked his right to remain silent. Remember, Anderson had stated 3 times that he didn't want to talk to police. Under the law, that should have ended all questioning immediately. But investigators, desperate to find Alayna and hoping she might still be alive, kept talking to him anyway. Judge Jeanne Ertl was assigned to hear the motion to suppress. The hearing took place in June of 2017, and both sides presented their arguments. The defense argued that everything Anderson said after invoking his rights should be excluded from trial. Without that statement, without Anderson saying "in the swamp" and leading officers to the body, the prosecution's case would be significantly weakened. The prosecution argued that the officers acted in good faith in an emergency situation, that they were trying to save a child's life, that the questioning wasn't coercive, and that Anderson eventually volunteered information. Judge Ertl had to balance 2 critical interests: the constitutional rights of the accused and the needs of justice for a murdered child. It's the kind of decision that judges dread, because either way you rule, someone will call you wrong. In June of 2017, Judge Ertl issued her ruling. The investigators had improperly questioned Anderson after he invoked his right to remain silent. Anderson's first statement, including him saying "in the swamp" and leading officers to Alayna's body, would be inadmissible at trial. This was a significant victory for the defense. Without that initial statement, proving exactly how the investigators found Alayna's body would be more difficult. The prosecution couldn't tell the jury, "Anderson told us where to find her," because that statement was now suppressed. However, and this is crucial, Judge Ertl did not dismiss the charges. The indictment stood. The case would proceed. The prosecution would simply have to build their case without using that initial statement. And they could do it. They had the cell phone tracking, they had the stolen vehicle at Anderson's family cabin, they had the physical evidence from the crime scene, they had the forensic evidence from the autopsy, they had Anderson's connection to the family and opportunity to commit the crime. Most importantly, they still had Anderson in custody, facing 19 criminal charges, with overwhelming evidence against him even without his initial statement to police. The suppression ruling was a win for constitutional rights, a reminder that even when investigating the worst crimes, law enforcement must respect the protections that our legal system guarantees to every person. But it wasn't going to save Zachary Anderson from facing justice. After the suppression ruling, both sides knew the lay of the land. The prosecution had a strong case, but not an airtight one. The defense knew their client was facing life in prison, but had at least won a significant legal victory. Trial was scheduled. Jury selection was approaching. And then, on March 2, 2018, something unexpected happened. Zachary Todd Anderson decided to plead guilty. The hearing took place in Cass County District Court in Walker, Minnesota. Judge Jeanne Ertl presided. Kip Fontaine, a public defender from Thief River Falls, represented Anderson. Benjamin Lindstrom, the Cass County attorney, represented the state. Anderson pled guilty to one count: first-degree murder while committing first-degree criminal sexual conduct with sexual penetration. This is the most serious murder charge in Minnesota law. It carries a mandatory sentence of life in prison without the possibility of parole. No parole eligibility, no chance of early release, no opportunity to petition for freedom later. Life means life. The remaining 18 charges were dismissed. They weren't needed anymore. Once Anderson pled guilty to first-degree murder with a mandatory life sentence, there was no point in prosecuting the other charges. In open court, Anderson had to allocate, meaning he had to verbally admit to the facts of the crime. With multiple Ertl family members present in the courtroom, Anderson stated that he had kidnapped Alayna from her home in Watkins, that he had sexually assaulted her, and that he had left her for dead in Cass County. According to reports, the family became emotional when Anderson spoke about the details. Imagine having to sit there, in a courtroom, listening to the man who murdered your daughter describe what he did. Imagine the discipline it took, not to scream, not to attack him, to simply sit and listen and bear witness. Several Ertl family members gave victim impact statements. The specific content of these statements was not made public, but one can imagine the pain and rage and grief they contained. Judge Ostad then imposed the mandatory sentence: life in prison without possibility of parole. After the hearing, Cass County Attorney Benjamin Lindstrom spoke to reporters. His statement revealed both the satisfaction of achieving justice and the recognition that nothing could truly make this right. Our goal was to get the maximum sentence of what Minnesota law allows of life in prison, without release, and that is what this plea did. If people are going to hurt our kids, we will do everything we can by law to make it right. This doesn't make it right, but it's the most we can do under the law. Lindstrom also expressed surprise that Anderson had decided to plead guilty. It was his decision to accept the plea. I didn't expect it to actually happen. He had no incentive to do it. We would have gone to a jury trial, and the end result would have been exactly the same, in my opinion. This is significant. Anderson had nothing to gain from pleading guilty. Even with the suppression ruling, he was almost certainly going to be convicted at trial and sentenced to life in prison. The prosecution had made clear they weren't going to compromise. This is a case where we weren't going to make a compromise. So why did Anderson plead guilty? We can only speculate. Perhaps he wanted to avoid a lengthy trial where every detail of his crimes would be aired publicly. Perhaps his attorneys convinced him that a trial would only make things worse. Perhaps he felt genuine remorse and wanted to spare the family the trauma of a trial. Or perhaps, as Lindstrom suggested, the prosecution's case was so overwhelming that even Anderson and his defense team recognized that going to trial was pointless. Lindstrom acknowledged that pleading guilty did spare the family one significant trauma. It's never going to be over for them because they don't have Alayna anymore. But avoiding a 3 to 4 week trial with graphic testimony and evidence meant the family didn't have to relive every detail in open court. On March 2, 2018, approximately 18 months after Alayna Ertl's death, Zachary Todd Anderson was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in a Minnesota state prison. He will never be released. He will die in prison. Is that justice? For some people, yes. For others, no punishment could ever be sufficient for what Anderson did. But it's the maximum that the law allows, and sometimes that has to be enough. In the aftermath of Anderson's sentencing, the community of Watkins was left to grapple with questions that have no satisfying answers. How did this happen? How did a man with a documented history of predatory behavior toward women and breaking into homes while families slept end up trusted enough to stay overnight in a home with a young child? How did the system fail so completely? The answer is complicated, and it involves multiple layers of failure. First, there's the 2006 to 2007 incident. When 16-year-old Zachary Anderson broke into his neighbor's home, he was charged with first-degree burglary. That's a serious felony. But in a plea deal, he pled guilty to third-degree burglary. His sentence was community service and an apology letter. No jail time, no registration, no flag in any system. Could the outcome have been different? Absolutely. First-degree burglary in Minnesota can carry up to 20 years in prison. Even for a juvenile offender, serious consequences were possible. But prosecutors and judges deal with countless cases, and they make decisions based on the information available at the time. A 16-year-old with no prior record breaks into a home and steals a cell phone. Should he be locked up for years? Or should he be given a chance to reform with community supervision and monitoring? It's an impossible question because we know how the story ends. We know that the 16-year-old who stole a cell phone became the 25-year-old who murdered a 5-year-old. But at the time, nobody knew that. Nobody could see the future. Second, there's the issue of how much information Matt and Kayla Ertl had about Anderson's background. Did they know about the 2006 incident? Did Matt know that his co-worker and softball buddy had a juvenile burglary conviction? We don't know. It's possible Anderson never mentioned it. It's possible Matt knew but didn't consider it relevant. After all, it was a juvenile offense from nearly 10 years earlier, and Anderson had no adult criminal record. Third, there's the fundamental problem of trust in small communities. In a town of 1,000 people, you can't function if you don't trust your neighbors. You can't live in constant suspicion of everyone around you. The very things that make small towns special, the trust, the familiarity, the sense of safety, are the same things that predators exploit. Sheriff Brian Cruz acknowledged this in his statements to the press. We have no known motive. We are at a loss as to why this happened at this time. Even law enforcement, with access to all available records and information, couldn't have predicted this. Anderson wasn't on a sex offender registry. He had no adult criminal record beyond traffic violations. There was no red flag that would have warned anyone. Except there was. The 2006 to 2007 case should have been a red flag. The pattern of behavior, unwanted advances, sexual demands, breaking into a home, should have marked Anderson as someone to watch. But juvenile records get buried. People forget. Time passes. And 10 years later, a teenage burglar had become a trusted family friend. One Ertl family relative asked the question that haunts everyone involved. Where's the line when you know when to trust somebody or not? It's the question without a good answer. Because the truth is, we can never know with certainty who to trust. We can do background checks. We can watch for warning signs. We can be cautious. But ultimately, trust requires vulnerability. And sometimes, that vulnerability is exploited in the worst possible ways. Does that mean we should never trust anyone? Does it mean we should do extensive background checks on everyone who comes into our homes? Does it mean we should live in constant fear and suspicion? No, because that's not living. That's just existing in a state of perpetual anxiety. But it does mean we need to be aware. It means warning signs shouldn't be dismissed. It means when someone shows you who they are, like Anderson did at 16 when he broke into a home, you should believe them. And it means the system needs to do better at tracking patterns of behavior, at recognizing escalation, at connecting dots that might seem unconnected at the time. Would any of this have saved Alayna Ertl? We'll never know. But we owe it to her memory to try to prevent the next tragedy. In the face of unimaginable grief, Matt and Kayla Ertl made a choice. They could let anger and bitterness consume them. They could retreat from the world. They could let Alayna's legacy be only about how she died. Or they could honor who she was in life. A little girl who loved others freely and innocently, who gave joy, who always had a smile and kind words for everyone. They chose the second path. On October 31st, 2016, what would have been Alayna's 6th birthday, Kayla Ertl hosted a public birthday celebration in her daughter's honor. The response was overwhelming. The community of Watkins showed up in force, bringing donations and support, wanting to help, wanting to do something, anything, to make meaning from this tragedy. That birthday celebration became the foundation for what would become Sharing Alayna Ertl's Love, a charitable organization dedicated to helping sick children and families in need through toy and monetary donations. The charity operates through two main annual events. First, there's Alayna's Halloween birthday party, held on the third Saturday closest to October 31st each year in Watkins. It's a free, community-wide event featuring music, games, bounce houses, and activities for children. Attendees are encouraged to bring toy donations or monetary donations, which are then distributed to sick children throughout the year, particularly pediatric patients at St. Cloud Hospital and families in the Litchfield area experiencing loss or hardship. Second, there's the annual Alayna Ertl Memorial Run, held on the third Saturday of August each year. This day-long event features ATV riders, motorcyclists, and hot rod enthusiasts, starting from Riverside Tavern in Litchfield, the establishment owned by Alayna's grandparents, Rick and Kim Ertl. Hundreds of participants join the run each year, with proceeds funding the birthday party and helping local families who need a bit of extra love. The charity's website, AlaynaErtl.com, includes a section titled, "Who is Alayna Ertl?" The description reads, "Alayna Ertl is a daughter and a very loving sister. She was abducted on August 20th, 2016. Her life was taken. She became an angel. She was known by her family as their little peanut that loved to help others, loved her family, and loved animals. She had a contagious smile and big brown eyes. Simply put, Alayna was put here on Earth to show us how to love. The website offers suggestions for how people can share Alayna's love. Attend the annual memorial run. Donate to sharing Alayna Ertl's love. Attend the Halloween birthday party. Be kind. Be caring. Snuggle an animal. Those last three are particularly moving. Be kind. Be caring. Snuggle an animal. Simple things that Alayna loved. Simple ways to honor her memory. Simple actions that can make the world a little bit better. Since 2016, the charity has donated thousands of toys to sick children. They've helped countless families in need. They've turned October 31st from a day of grief into a day of celebration and giving. Kayla Ertl has said that the charity helps her feel connected to Alayna, that it gives purpose to the pain, that it allows Alayna's love to continue spreading even though she's no longer physically present. And in September of 2023, 7 years after Alayna's death, the community erected a permanent memorial, a life-size statue of Alayna in McCarthy Park in Watkins. The project took 2 years and involved collaboration between multiple local businesses. It stands as a permanent reminder of a life too short but deeply impactful. This is how a community heals. Not by forgetting, not by moving on, but by remembering, by honoring, by taking tragedy and finding some way, any way, to create something positive from it. Alayna's legacy isn't just about how she died, it's about how she lived, and through the charity bearing her name, that legacy continues. Zachary Todd Anderson is currently serving his life sentence in a Minnesota state prison. Under Minnesota law, a sentence of life without parole means exactly that. He will never be released. He will never be eligible for parole. He will die in prison. He is now in his early 30s. If he lives an average lifespan, he'll spend another 40 to 50 years behind bars. Every day for the rest of his life, he'll wake up in a cell. Every day, he'll be reminded of what he did. Every day, he'll have to live with the knowledge of the horror he inflicted. Is that punishment enough? The Ertl family would probably say no. No punishment could ever equal what was taken from them. But it's all that the law allows. Matt and Kayla Ertl still live in Watkins. They continue to run, sharing Alayna's love. They parent their surviving son, Carter, who is now in his teenage years. They attend St. Anthony Catholic Church. They see neighbors who stood with them during the worst days of their lives. Their lives will never be the same. They will never stop missing Alayna. Every birthday, every holiday, every milestone that Carter reaches will be tinged with the awareness that Alayna will never experience those things. But they continue. They survive. They find purpose in keeping Alayna's memory alive. The community of Watkins has also continued. They rebuilt after the tornado. They buried other community members who died from natural causes. They celebrated weddings and graduations and births. Life goes on, as it must, even in the shadow of tragedy. But Watkins was changed by what happened in August of 2016. Parents are more cautious about who they trust with their children. Background checks are run more frequently. The innocence that characterized small-town life has been tempered by the awareness that evil can hide behind a friendly face. The woman who was victimized by Anderson in 2006 and 2007 has not spoken publicly since her initial interview in 2016. One hopes she has found peace, has moved on with her life, and doesn't blame herself for what happened to Alayna. Because it wasn't her fault. She reported Anderson's behavior. She pressed charges. The system failed to recognize the danger he posed. K9 Yankee, the German shepherd who tracked Anderson through the swamp, has since retired from active duty. Deputy Bill Connor, his handler, has spoken at various law enforcement conferences about the importance of K9 units in search and rescue operations. Steve Pearson, Yankee's trainer, continues to work with police dogs, teaching them the skills that can save lives. Sheriff Brian Cruz remains the Meeker County Sheriff. He's dealt with numerous cases since August of 2016, but one imagines that Alayna's case stays with him, as it does with all the officers who worked those terrible 8 hours on August 20th, 2016. Cass County Attorney Benjamin Lindstrom successfully prosecuted Anderson and has continued his work in the county attorney's office. His statement about doing everything possible under the law to protect children remains a guiding principle for prosecutors across Minnesota. Judge Jana M. Ostad made the difficult constitutional ruling about Anderson's Fifth Amendment rights, then presided over his guilty plea and sentencing. She continues to serve on the bench in Cass County, making hard decisions in difficult cases, balancing the rights of the accused against the needs of justice. And Alayna Ertl remains forever 5 years old in the memories of everyone who knew her and in the hearts of thousands who never met her but were touched by her story. What can we learn from the tragedy of Alayna Ertl? What lessons can we take from this horrific case that might prevent future tragedies? First, we need to take juvenile offenses more seriously, especially when they involve patterns of sexual aggression or boundary violations. Zachary Anderson's behavior at age 15 and 16 clearly indicated predatory tendencies. The fact that he received only community service for breaking into a home where women and children were sleeping represents a significant failure of the justice system. This doesn't mean every teenage offender should be locked up forever, but it does mean that certain patterns of behavior, particularly sexual aggression, targeting of vulnerable victims, and home invasions, should trigger more intensive supervision, mandatory treatment, and long-term monitoring. Second, we need better systems for tracking and flagging individuals who show these patterns across multiple incidents. Anderson's behavior involved multiple incidents with the same victim over more than a year. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was an escalating pattern, and the system didn't adequately respond. Third, we need to educate communities about recognizing grooming behavior and predatory patterns. Anderson wasn't a stranger lurking in bushes. He was a trusted friend who cultivated that trust specifically to gain access to a vulnerable child. This is how most child sexual abuse occurs, not by strangers, but by trusted adults who use their position to isolate and abuse children. Parents need to understand that predators often seem like the nicest, most trustworthy people. They volunteer for youth activities, they befriend parents, they become indispensable parts of community social networks, and they use that trust as camouflage for their true intentions. Fourth, we need to stop assuming that small towns are inherently safer than cities. The idea that this kind of thing doesn't happen here is dangerous. It does happen. It happens everywhere. Urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas. Predators exist in all of them. The difference is that in small towns, the trust networks are tighter, which can make it easier for predators to operate. Fifth, we need to support victims of lesser offenses who try to warn others about predatory behavior. The woman who was victimized by Anderson in 2006 tried to speak out after Alayna's death, hoping others would come forward. We need systems that encourage victims to report concerning behavior without fear of retaliation or dismissal. Sixth, we need to recognize that constitutional protections exist for important reasons, even when they seem to benefit guilty people. Judge Ostad's ruling that Anderson's Fifth Amendment rights were violated was controversial. Many people thought his rights should be subordinated to the need to find Alayna. But constitutional protections don't have emergency exception clauses. They apply even in the worst cases, even when following them seems to help terrible people. Because the alternative, allowing law enforcement to ignore constitutional rights when they decide it's important enough, is even more dangerous. Seventh, we need to support communities that experience tragedy. Watkins experienced multiple tragedies in quick succession: the fatal drunk driving crash, the tornado, and then Alayna's murder. The compounding effect of multiple traumatic events can overwhelm a community's ability to cope. Mental health services, community support systems, and simple presence matter. The vigil, the funeral, the charity work, all of these helped Watkins process an impossible situation. Other communities facing tragedy can learn from how Watkins came together. Eighth, we need to recognize that some questions don't have satisfying answers. Why did Anderson do this? We don't really know. What was his motive? We don't know that either. Could it have been prevented? Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes, terrible things happen for reasons we can't fully understand. Sometimes, people who seem normal commit incomprehensible acts. And sometimes, we have to live with the discomfort of not knowing why. Finally, we need to support families who are trying to create positive legacies from tragedy. The Ertl family could have retreated into grief and bitterness. Instead, they created a charity that helps sick children. They turned Alayna's birthday into an annual celebration of giving. They ensured that her memory would be associated with love and kindness, not just with how she died. That kind of resilience doesn't come easily. It requires tremendous emotional strength and a conscious decision to not let evil have the final word. Other families facing similar tragedies can look to the Ertls as an example of how to survive the unsurvivable. One of the remarkable aspects of Alayna's case is how well law enforcement performed under extraordinarily difficult circumstances. Within 8 hours of the missing person report being filed, they had located Anderson, found Alayna's body, and secured the crime scene. This didn't happen by accident. It happened because multiple agencies coordinated effectively, because technology was used appropriately, because a canine unit was deployed at exactly the right time, and because Anderson's father made the difficult decision to cooperate with authorities. Let's break down what law enforcement did right. First, they took the missing person report seriously immediately. 5-year-old children don't just wander away. When the report came in that Alayna was missing, along with a family friend and the family's vehicle, investigators knew instantly that this was a serious situation. Second, they coordinated across multiple jurisdictions. The Meeker County Sheriff's Office didn't try to handle everything alone. They brought in the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, coordinated with Todd County Sheriff's Office for cell phone tracking, worked with Cass County Sheriff when the trail led north, and accepted help from the Minnesota State Patrol, FBI, and Minnesota DNR. In many cases, jurisdictional disputes and ego can hamper investigations. But in Alayna's case, everyone focused on the mission: find the child. Third, they used technology appropriately. The cell phone tracking through Todd County gave investigators the general direction Anderson had traveled. The Amber Alert mobilized thousands of eyes across the state. The helicopter with infrared searched the woods around the cabin. Fourth, they followed up on tips aggressively. When Anderson's father called with information about the cabin, officers were deployed immediately. They didn't wait. They didn't second guess. They acted. Fifth, they deployed specialized resources at the right time. The K-9 unit with Deputy Connor and Yankee was crucial. Without Yankee's tracking ability, Anderson might have remained hidden in the swamp for hours or days longer. He might have died by suicide before revealing where Alayna's body was hidden. Now, did they make mistakes? Yes. The decision to continue questioning Anderson after he invoked his Fifth Amendment rights was a mistake. It was understandable. They were desperate to find Alayna and hoping she might still be alive. But it was still a constitutional violation. The fact that Judge Ostad ruled against law enforcement on this point actually strengthens the overall integrity of the case. It shows that the justice system works, that constitutional protections are enforced, that even in the worst circumstances, rights matter. And critically, the suppression of Anderson's initial statement didn't prevent justice. He still pled guilty. He still received the maximum sentence. The case still resulted in a just outcome. Law enforcement in Minnesota learned from this case. Training protocols were updated to emphasize the importance of respecting constitutional rights, even in emergency circumstances. Procedures were refined for handling cases involving missing children. The role of canine units in wilderness searches was highlighted and expanded. And one more thing. The officers who worked Alayna's case carried the emotional weight of what they saw. Sheriff Cruz acknowledged this in his press conference. When they learned Alayna was dead, you could see it weighed heavy on them. Law enforcement officers are human beings. They go home to their own families. Many of them have children the same age as the victims in cases like this. Working a case like Alayna's takes a toll that the public rarely sees. We ask law enforcement to run toward danger, to see the worst of humanity, to make split-second decisions with life or death consequences, and then to testify about it all in court. It's an impossible job, and they deserve recognition for doing it as well as they can. In Alayna's case, despite one constitutional misstep, law enforcement did their job exceptionally well. They found Anderson. They found Alayna. They built a case that resulted in justice. And they did it all in 8 hours under intense pressure and public scrutiny. Cass County Attorney Benjamin Lindstrom's handling of Anderson's prosecution provides valuable insights into how prosecutors approach cases involving crimes against children. Lindstrom made several key decisions that shaped the outcome. First, he charged Anderson with every applicable crime. The 19-count indictment wasn't prosecutorial overreach. It was a strategic decision to ensure that no matter what happened at trial, which legal theory the jury accepted, which charges stuck, Anderson would face serious consequences. Multiple charges also provided negotiating leverage if plea discussions occurred. Though in this case, Lindstrom made clear, this is a case where we weren't going to make a compromise. Second, he didn't reduce charges or offer a plea deal that would have allowed for any possibility of parole. The charge Anderson pled guilty to, first-degree murder while committing first-degree criminal sexual conduct, carries a mandatory sentence of life without parole. Lindstrom accepted nothing less. His statement after sentencing made his philosophy clear. Our goal was to get the maximum sentence of what Minnesota law allows of life in prison without release, and that is what this plea did. If people are going to hurt our kids, we will do everything we can, by law, to make it right. This doesn't make it right, but it's the most we can do under the law. This is the approach prosecutors should take in cases involving children. No compromises, no deals that allow dangerous offenders back into society. The maximum penalty allowed by law, every single time. Third, Lindstrom accepted Anderson's guilty plea, even though he believed a trial would have resulted in the same outcome. Some prosecutors might have insisted on a trial to ensure the fullest possible public accounting of what happened. But Lindstrom recognized that the plea spared the Ertl family from weeks of graphic testimony and evidence. His comment about this was compassionate. It's never going to be over for them, because they don't have Alayna anymore. Avoiding a 3 to 4 week trial meant the family didn't have to relive every detail in open court. This shows good judgment. Justice doesn't always mean the most public, most dramatic outcome. Sometimes justice means achieving the best result for victims while minimizing additional trauma. Fourth, Lindstrom was honest about his surprise that Anderson pled guilty. It was his decision to accept the plea. I didn't expect it to actually happen. He had no incentive to do it. This candor is refreshing. Lindstrom didn't claim to have pressured Anderson into the plea or take credit for some brilliant prosecutorial strategy. He acknowledged that Anderson made a choice that benefited the family, even though it didn't benefit Anderson himself. Finally, Lindstrom's public statements struck the right balance between satisfaction that justice was achieved and recognition that nothing could truly make this right. He didn't gloat. He didn't grandstand. He simply explained what his office had accomplished and why it mattered. Prosecutors like Benjamin Lindstrom, who take crimes against children seriously, who refuse to compromise on charging decisions, who balance legal strategy with compassion for victims, who are honest with the public about what justice can and cannot achieve, are exactly what the system needs. Not every prosecutor handles cases this well. Not every case results in the maximum possible sentence. Not every family receives this level of consideration and respect. The Ertl family was fortunate that their daughter's case was handled by someone who understood that justice for children requires more than just securing a conviction. It requires dignity, respect, and an unwavering commitment to ensuring that offenders face the fullest consequences that the law allows. Judge Jeanne Ertl faced one of the most difficult decisions any judge can face, balancing constitutional rights against the needs of justice in a case involving a murdered child. Her ruling that Anderson's Fifth Amendment rights had been violated was legally correct but emotionally difficult. She knew that ruling in Anderson's favor on this motion would be controversial. She knew people would accuse her of caring more about a child murderer's rights than about the murdered child. But that's not what the ruling meant. Constitutional protections exist precisely because we need them most in the cases we find most repugnant. It's easy to protect the rights of sympathetic defendants, people accused of crimes they probably didn't commit, people who have good explanations for their behavior, people we can imagine ourselves being. It's much harder to protect the rights of people like Zachary Anderson, people who almost certainly committed terrible crimes, people whose guilt seems obvious, people we'd prefer to simply lock away without the formality of proper procedure. But that's exactly when constitutional protections matter most. Because if we only protect rights when it's convenient, when the defendant is sympathetic, when we're not sure of guilt, then we don't really have rights at all. We just have privileges that can be revoked whenever society decides someone doesn't deserve them. Judge Ertl's ruling sent several important messages. First, that law enforcement must respect constitutional rights even in emergency situations. The urgency of finding Alayna did not override Anderson's Fifth Amendment protections. Officers who continue questioning after someone invokes their right to silence are violating the Constitution, regardless of how important the case is. Second, that constitutional violations have consequences. The suppression of Anderson's initial statement wasn't merely symbolic. It meant the prosecution couldn't use that evidence at trial. Actions have consequences, even for law enforcement acting with good intentions. Third, that justice can still be achieved even when constitutional violations occur. The suppression ruling didn't destroy the case. Anderson still pled guilty. The family still got justice. This demonstrates that following constitutional requirements doesn't mean dangerous criminals go free. Fourth, that judges must make decisions based on law, not emotion. Ertl couldn't let the horrific nature of the crime influence her ruling on the constitutional question. The law was clear. Once Anderson invoked his rights, questioning should have stopped. Her personal feelings about what Anderson had done were irrelevant. When Ostad presided over Anderson's guilty plea and sentencing, she maintained the same professional demeanor. She ensured Anderson understood what he was pleading guilty to. She listened to victim impact statements. She imposed the mandatory sentence. And then she moved on to her next case. Because that's what judges do. They make difficult decisions in difficult cases. They live with the consequences of those decisions, and they continue doing the work that democracy requires. Judges like Jana Ostad, who are willing to make unpopular decisions based on constitutional principle, who can separate law from emotion, who understand that protecting rights in hard cases is what makes rights meaningful, are essential to a functioning justice system. Not every judge would have ruled the same way Ostad did. Some would have found ways to admit the statement despite the constitutional problems. Some would have prioritized the outcome over the process. But Ostad got it right. Even though her ruling temporarily helped a child murderer, even though people criticized her, even though the easy path would have been to find some exception, some justification for ignoring the constitutional violation, she followed the law, and ultimately, justice was still achieved. In the end, what matters most about this case isn't the legal complexities, isn't the investigation timeline, isn't even the conviction and sentencing of Zachary Anderson. What matters most is remembering who Alayna Ertl was. She was a 5-year-old girl who loved Frozen and My Little Ponies, who wore pink and purple, who sang, "You Are My Sunshine," who came into her parents' room every morning to give kisses and make sure everyone was okay. She was a daughter, a sister, a granddaughter, a cousin, a friend. She was a student about to start kindergarten. She was a community member in a town of 1,000 people who knew her name and her smile. She was, as Reverend Nett said at her funeral, a little girl who was given to us as a gift. She had a love for others which was free and innocent. Free and innocent. That's what 5-year-old children should be. That's what Alayna was. Her death was not the defining moment of her life. Her life was defined by joy, by love, by kindness, by that contagious smile and those big brown eyes that everyone who knew her remembers. The charity bearing her name continues that legacy. Every toy donated to a sick child, every family helped in their time of need. Every person who shows up to the Halloween birthday party or the annual memorial run, they're all living expressions of who Alayna was and what she valued. The statue in McCarthy Park isn't just a memorial to a murdered child. It's a celebration of a life that, though far too short, made a lasting impact on everyone who knew her. When you look at pictures of Alayna, and there are many available on the charity's website and in news coverage, you see a child who was deeply loved and deeply happy. You see a little girl who had no idea that evil existed in the world. You see innocence personified. And that's what was stolen. Not just a life, but innocence itself. The innocence of a child who trusted adults to keep her safe. The innocence of a family who welcomed a friend into their home. The innocence of a community that believed this kind of thing couldn't happen here. But even as innocence was stolen, something else emerged. Resilience. The Ertl family's resilience in continuing to live and to honor their daughter's memory. The community's resilience in coming together, in supporting each other, in refusing to let tragedy define them. And perhaps most importantly, the deliberate choice to respond to evil, not with more evil, not with bitterness and hatred, but with love, by sharing Alayna's love with others who need it. There's a line from Alayna's obituary that captures this perfectly. She had a love for others, which was free and innocent. Free. Not constrained by conditions or requirements or expectations, not limited to family or friends, just free and innocent. Not in the sense of naive, but in the sense of pure. Uncomplicated by the cynicism and suspicion that adults carry. Simple, straightforward, genuine. That's the legacy that matters. That's what we should remember when we think about Alayna Ertl. Yes, she was murdered. Yes, her death was horrific and senseless. Yes, justice was achieved when her killer was sentenced to life in prison. But Alayna was so much more than a victim. She was a complete person who lived 5 joyful years, who loved and was loved, who made the world brighter simply by being in it. And through the charity bearing her name, she still does. The murder of Alayna Ertl asks uncomfortable questions that we'd all prefer not to think about. How safe are our children, really? How well do we know the people we trust? What warning signs might we be missing? Could this happen to us? These questions don't have reassuring answers. The truth is that children are most often harmed not by strangers but by people they know. The truth is that predators are often skilled at appearing trustworthy. The truth is that warning signs are sometimes ignored or minimized. And the truth is that yes, This could happen to any family, in any community, anywhere. But here's another truth. The vast majority of people are not predators. The vast majority of family, friends, co-workers, neighbors, and acquaintances can be trusted. The vast majority of overnight guests do not kidnap and murder children. If we allow fear to make us suspicious of everyone, we lose the very things that make communities worth living in: trust, connection, mutual support, the ability to rely on each other. So, how do we balance these competing truths? How do we protect children without destroying the fabric of community life? There's no perfect answer. But here are some principles. Trust, but verify. Background checks exist for a reason. Use them, especially for anyone who will have unsupervised access to children. Listen to your instincts. If something feels off about someone, pay attention to that feeling. Our subconscious often picks up on warning signs that our conscious mind dismisses. Take reports of concerning behavior seriously. When someone, especially a child, reports that an adult made them uncomfortable, believe them and investigate. Teach children that they have bodily autonomy and the right to say no to unwanted touch, even from trusted adults. Create environments where children feel safe reporting concerning behavior without fear of punishment or disbelief. Support victims of lesser offenses who try to warn others. The woman Anderson, victimized in 2006, tried to speak out after Alayna's death. Listen to those warnings. Recognize that some people are very, very good at seeming trustworthy while hiding dark intentions. Surface-level vetting isn't always enough. And finally, remember that we can't prevent every tragedy. We can be vigilant, we can be careful, we can create systems and safeguards, but we cannot guarantee absolute safety. Sometimes, terrible things happen despite everyone doing everything right. Sometimes, predators slip through every safeguard. Sometimes, families trust the wrong person. And when that happens, the response matters. The Watkins community's response to Alayna's death, the vigil, the funeral, the charity, the memorial statue, demonstrates how communities can support grieving families while honoring the memory of a life lost too soon. Zachary Anderson will spend the rest of his life in prison, as he should. But Alayna's legacy isn't about him, it's about her. It's about a 5-year-old girl with a contagious smile who loved others freely and innocently. It's about parents who turned unspeakable grief into ongoing charity. It's about a community that came together in the darkest of times. It's about law enforcement officers who did their jobs under tremendous pressure. It's about a canine named Yankee who tracked a suspect through a swamp and helped bring closure to a grieving family. It's about prosecutors and judges who ensured justice was achieved while protecting constitutional rights. It's about all of us remembering that behind every true crime story is a real person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, who deserved so much better than what happened to her. This is the story of Alayna Jeanne Ertl. May her memory be a blessing, may her legacy be love, and may we all work to create a world where no other family has to endure what the Ertls have endured. Thank you for listening to this Cold Case Desk. Before we close, I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to Alayna's story. Cases like this one are never easy to hear, but it's important that we remember the victims and honor their memories by telling their stories with the dignity and respect they deserve. If this documentary touched you in any way, please take a moment to leave a comment below. Share your thoughts about the case, about how communities can better protect children, or simply leave a message honoring Alayna's memory. I read every single comment, and your engagement helps these stories reach more people. If you're new to Cold Case Desk, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you never miss a new documentary. This channel is dedicated to telling the stories of victims with thorough research, respectful presentation, and a commitment to factual accuracy. Your subscription helps support the extensive research that goes into each and every case we cover. You can also support the channel by sharing this video with others who appreciate well-researched true crime content. Every share helps spread awareness and keeps these important stories alive. Until next time, stay safe, hold your loved ones close, and remember, be kind, be caring, and share a little love, just as Alayna would have done. This is Cold Case Desk, signing off.